Okay, it's about a minute after 5, and we do appear to have a quorum, so I will call this meeting of the Transportation Policy and Planning Board to order for June 14th, 2021. Reva, if you would please call the roll.
Grant Foster.
Here.
Keith Furman.
Present.
Barbara Harrington McKinney. Eric Sundquist. Randy Udell. Christopher McKinney.
Here.
Baltazar Deanda Santana.
Here.
Margaret Bergamini.
Here.
And Bedranath Lankala.
Here.
Thank you, Reva. We do have a quorum. Jesse, if you would please proceed with our virtual meetings opening statement.
All right. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. Staff and committee will have muting and unmuting control for themselves. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted briefly. Staff, please raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which their hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the board, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jesse. Approval of minutes from the May 17th, 2021 meeting, assuming all board members have had a chance to review those if they so chose. Is there a motion to approve? Motion by Badri, is there a second? Second by Chris McCahill. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving our minutes from the May 17th, 2021 meeting, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised. I'm sorry, go ahead, Margaret.
I'd like to abstain. I didn't get a chance to see them.
Okay, thank you. So noted. All right, those minutes are approved with one abstention. Are there any communications, disclosures, and recusals from members of the board? Margaret, I assume your hand up is from the minutes. Okay. Then we have public comment for items not on the agenda. I believe we have one registrant, a John Becker, Madison, Wisconsin. John, I see you there. If you're ready, you may begin. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission or Board. I'm wishing to speak about the Fare Collection Study. And I have to apologize. It's unclear from the agenda if that's item number 7, but I felt it best to weigh in under number 1, public comment, because of my uncertainty. Basically, I want to let the board know that I've asked staff, Justin, to send details in support of staff's anti-fare free stance as soon as possible, because now that the report has been delayed to the summer, it's awfully difficult to make a substantive public input and provide you with the best information. Some of our experts are academics and they're on leave for the summer or away, and that's typical of summer hearings. So I also asked Justin to consider moving the public meeting or hearing for this event, for this report and the release of the details to September or October even. That would give us time after the details are released, which is now promised for this month, so that we can actually make meaningful input. I'm also very interested in getting a response to the board members' request last meeting for incident analysis, since the city is claiming that there were problems during the fare-free service. We need, of course, comparison of that period with like services elsewhere, with prior service here, and with reports out of Kansas City that so far they've dropped their driver violence incidents to 0 using the fare-free approach. And for that, I thank the board and staff for a chance to make this comment.
Thank you, John. Are there any questions for the speaker? So just for reference, it's always possible to speak on an agenda item when that item is taken up, but it's often also allowed to speak on an agenda item at the beginning of a meeting. A lot of folks can't be here for an entire meeting, so that's often allowed as well. So either way is fine. Are there any other registrants for items not on the agenda? Reva, anyone who's registered since you sent out the list?
No, I just have people wanting to speak on item number 3.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Change here.
Chair, we also have a registrant on item 2.
Okay, thank you. Reva, then if you could, or Jesse, if you could just send me that via email, appreciate it. All right, item number 2, we'll start with the director's report from Tom Lynch.
Thank you. So I'm going to say several consequential things happened since the last director's report in May. I'm going to say 2 of them are quite good, and one of them is, I'm not sure I'm allowed to have an opinion on or not. But the first one is the recommendation from the FTA and the USDOT. The Madison BRT receive project funding in their 2022 fiscal year budget. That's really a huge announcement. Now, it still needs to be approved by Congress, but this is essentially the same announcement that President Trump did for the Milwaukee BRT. I believe it was about a year ago. And just last Thursday, I attended the groundbreaking for Milwaukee BRT. So this is very good news for us. A second bit of good news is Representative Pocan submitted a series of projects that are already have been in the pipeline and presented to this board to Representative Pocan. And this budget cycle, the Congress is being allowed to do what they call community projects. It's kind of a new name for something that existed called earmarks. And Representative Pocan submitted the Atwood Avenue project as an earmark. And then the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee included that in their budget bill. So, and that's about a $6 million. So that one is perhaps less sure than the FTA funding for the BRT, but it's still really good news. One reason it's good news is one, it helps Madison complete a project, but 2, these types of projects are typically completed with monies from the Madison area MPO, the Surface Transportation Block Grant. And the MPO only gets $7 million per year. And so there's a high competition for all of Dane County for those monies. And so basically if we were to receive this funding, that would free up monies that would ordinarily have gone to Atwood Avenue, and they could be used on other projects. So that's just very good news as well. Although that funding, I'm going to say, is less sure than the BRT funding. The third item is actually concerning for Metro Transit operations, and that the Joint Finance Committee, State Budget Committee, is going through the budget process, and last Tuesday decided to cut Metro Transit's funding and Milwaukee County Transit's funding in half for this next budget cycle. And so the transit funding for other state transit agencies like Green Bay, Fond du Lac, and Beloit, and Janesville, La Crosse, and Wausau, and Eau Claire, they remain uncut. And so that is disappointing. And it will affect Metro Transit if that remains through the budget process. Boston Rapid Transit, we're continuing to move forward as quickly as we can. As mentioned, we have a public information meeting, involvement meeting. The Urban Design Commission selected number 1 and number 2 station design. Right now, we're working with consultants to kind of make that design fit inside of Madison and make it perhaps a little bit less maintenance heavy. We've hired a project manager to help with this rather large project. In May, the Transit Network Redesign Project held a series of internal workshops, and then they invited some stakeholders to summary sessions afterwards. And the project consultant is now refining the input of those and analyzing the effect of those 2 concept networks. And I think that that information will be available at the meeting in mid-July to present to you. We had a good work session with Transportation Demand Management. Transportation Demand Management has the opportunity to really help reduce the amount of VMT that we are distributing. And so we presented that to a joint meeting of the TPPB and Planning Commission, although it was really labeled more as a Planning Commission work session. We received a lot of good comments. I think we have comments on both sides, comments to make sure that we do it in a way that we really do reduce VMT, so the measures are targeted and we reduce VMT. But then we're getting individual comments from developers saying, well, it's really hard to meet the requirements here or here. And we have to kind of figure out where it's easy to meet the requirements here. So we have to kind of figure out, do we need more measures, for maybe some outlying developers so they can meet these standards, or how do we do this? We're on I'm just going to say we're on a little bit of a pause, maybe a 4-week pause, but we plan on resuming that, relatively soon and trying to move forward with policy, programming, ordinance. Parking enforcement is transferred to the parking utility is going as planned, and Sabrina Tolley is working with some of the PEO staff on finding a facility. And she also will be sending out jointly with us a communication plan that was requested by the council. And I believe that will be sent out this week. 20 is plenty, but Transportation Commission selected 2 pilot neighborhoods. That's exciting. Yang put some information regarding pedestrian and bicycle enhancement projects in the Shared Streets, Slow Streets program. Tomorrow and Wednesday, we are initiating some of the Let's Talk Streets public engagement that will be used for both the Complete Green Streets as well as the Vision Zero initiatives. I think those are the main items from the director's report. Any questions?
Thanks, Tom. We do have one registrant for public comment on this item. Bob Schaefer, 6 Cottonwood Circle, wishing to speak. Bob, if you're ready, you have 3 minutes. You may begin when you're unmuted.
Yeah, I'm going to yield my time. I wasn't quite sure what the report was going to introduce, and so that I have no comment on this report.
All right, thank you, Bob. All right, then any questions for Tom? Alder Foster, please go ahead.
Thank you, Tom. Regarding the state funding changes, do you have any information around, are there plans to engage our Madison area state representatives? Are they already in the loop? And is there any advocacy that we can consider from as the policy board or as a common council that we should be sending any more formal communication on this?
Yeah. I have to walk this fine line because I'm told I can't lobby, right? So I have to, there is the people who are allowed to lobby within the city are making up a plan, right? And doing that, I think the Milwaukee County executive has been quite vocal on how this is going to affect them. They've contacted the governor's office as well. And similar efforts are occurring, or likely will be occurring within Madison. And so there's a kind of the direct expressing of these concerns to the governor's office as well as to the legislative kind of constituency, our legislators in the state government for the Madison area. I think both would, if this proposal is of concern to you, contacts with those, the representatives and the senators that represent it, you should let them know. It basically, 30% of Metro Transit's state funding, it comes from the state, and this takes away half of that. So it's of consequence.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I guess maybe sounds like some, but perhaps if you could check with the mayor's office and others that might be working on this, and if it seems helpful, perhaps this is something that should even go out as a message to all alders, and or a press release from the city, depending on kind of where things are at. But I agree with you; it's very significant, and I think it's critical that the council knows kind of what's going on, and perhaps we need to work to spread the message further out as well. So you could just kind of take those questions back and.
There are people on this, and this did not receive as very much media attention on either the State Journal or Madison.com for how considerable an issue it is to Metro Transit.
Yeah, and I think so. Yeah. You check in and let us, perhaps think about us a little bit wider. And then also it seems like something that might be worth getting on finance committee's radar as well, just because of the obvious potential impacts that would have to our overall budgeting process. And then my other question was just, I saw you said this sort of the slow streets, when they're waiting for the equipment from Ride the Drive. Do you have any idea what is that something in the next kind of couple of weeks or we might be able to see go up? I've been continuing to get a lot of questions from residents.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out too. I did send out some emails this weekend. Particularly, I was noticing, it was a beautiful weekend, and Atwood Avenue was there's lots of people on the sidewalk, cyclists in the street, but then they're sharing the street with cars, and so. I don't have an update on that, but I recognize how people are starting to use, particularly the Lake Loop, and how it would be good to have some of that traffic control in place. And so perhaps I could, when I find out more, I can interact with you directly.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Alder Foster. Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, a question, Tom. Regarding the state budget is the Wisconsin Association of Transit Operators organizations lobbying on this, or the city lobbyists working on this. I understand. I mean, I know that it's a difficult situation given the balance in the legislature, but
yeah. So WIPTA, WI, Wisconsin Public Transportation Association, is well aware of what has occurred and has been in contact with both Madison and Milwaukee. They have lobbyists, and they've described what it looked like during the Finance Committee meeting and how things swung so rapidly from one direction to another. And so they're aware, they're contacting us. Our lobbyists are aware, and we're formulating a way to communicate how this will affect Madison transportation. I'm going to say Milwaukee is probably a couple days ahead of us, but it's of concern to both of us. For Madison, it would represent about a loss of $8.6 million. So it's not a small amount.
yeah, and it's also unfortunately not a unique situation. This has happened a number of different budget cycles, and in particular, sort of the singling out of these systems. And as I recall, in at least one budget cycle, something that was key to turning the situation around was pointing out how in that case, it was written in such a way that it was actually going to have some bad impacts in some other transit districts affecting some other legislators, and that helped swing it. So I suspect that's part of the reason why this was so very specifically targeted. But that organization has a lot of experience with this situation, unfortunately. So I just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that as well. And yes, I echo Grant's sentiments that if there's anything that we can do or organizations that we work with can do, please let us know post haste.
Thank you, Margaret. Any other questions for Tom? All right, thank you, Tom. Our next item then, amending the Hanson Neighborhood Development Plan, a supplement to the City of Madison Comprehensive Plan to provide updated recommendations for the area located along Portage Road between Hanson Road and De Loreto Avenue. Go ahead, Jeff.
So since the last meeting, staff has put together a memo or an amendment or addendum to the staff memo addressing the concerns and the questions that the board brought up in May. I'm happy to go through that memo point by point or answer questions. I want to make sure I'm respecting everyone's time. I'm not sure if everyone's had a chance to review it. So if you want me to go through it, let me know. Otherwise, available to answer questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Yeah, I did not see the item, so and I apologize for not reviewing it, but I would appreciate in this case if you could run through the key points.
Yep, definitely. So I'm sharing my screen here. Hopefully you can all see it. The first concern that was brought up was whether or not this area was appropriate for increased density on the edge of the city. And staff's response is that this proposed development pattern is not unique within the city of Madison. It's a natural extension of the development to the south. This area is identified as a growth priority area in the comprehensive plan. based on its proximity to existing development and utilities. This area is also within the central urban service area. The proposed change from single-family residential to a mix of housing types, staff believes would utilize this land more efficiently, and the change is intended to produce a variety of different housing types. While the area is generally undeveloped now, this area is seen as more interior to significant development to the north and east of this area. As well, this area is in the town of Burke. A part of this area is in the town of Burke and will be attached to the city of Madison in 2036. And staff anticipates this area will continue to grow consistent with the comp plan. Second point, there was concern about adding density to the land within the DeForest School District. January of this year, January 25th, MMSD and DeForest Area School District agreed to a boundary change. So this map shows the land that swaps. So the green areas were in DeForest Area School District, and this red area was in MMSD. They agreed to the swap. So now the red area is in the forest area. And the justification for this boundary change was that the area in that red triangle is more proximate to the DeForest Area School District than the area along Packers Avenue. So students would have a shorter trip to the DeForest Area schools. Staff contacted DeForest Area schools to find out how many students were bused to the elementary, middle, and high school from this area. For the 2019 to 2020 school year, we asked for that school year because of the pandemic. We wanted to get numbers for as full of a school year in person as we could. So they told us 43 students were bused from this area, the Churchill Heights subdivision, west of Portage Road. And there was one student attending MMSD schools from the Hidden Creek apartment complex on the east side of Portage Road. We also asked them for their projections of new students projected to come from this proposed development. And their expectations would be 72 students would attend the DeForest Area School District. Their projections went out to 2035. And those students would attend either the Windsor Elementary School, which is 7 miles from the amendment area, DeForest Middle School, which is 9 miles, or the DeForest High School, which is 9 miles. Just for a little bit of context, the city of Madison overlaps or borders with 9 different school districts. And staff feels that city growth should continue to occur in these areas if it's consistent with our growth policies. The Pumpkin Hollow NDP, which is just to the northeast of this amendment area, is entirely within the DeForest Area School District. And it includes area for a recommended new DeForest Area School, which if developed would reduce travel times for DeForest Area School District students living within the amendment area. I also want to point out that families also have the option to open enroll, if that best suits their student situation. We also spoke with traffic engineering and MPO staff to get some traffic projections done for Portage Road. Currently, Portage Road north of Hayes Road has an average daily traffic volume of 2,950 trips. And is projected to have a traffic volume between 5,500 and 6,500 average weekday trips by 2050. The proposed development in this NDP amendment is projected to produce about 4,000 new daily trips at build out. So the MPO's 2050 projection is not necessarily projecting a total build out of this development, but pretty close. And then traffic engineering division staff indicated that a collector street like Portage Road should be able to handle these additional trips. This table below breaks down those trips by the different housing mixes proposed within this amendment area. And then the third concern or question brought up last time was about the potential to extend transit service to the north along Portage Road. I'm going to show a map here. Hopefully it is easier. You can see it okay. So overlaying the bus stop, the existing bus stops on Route 6 with the amendment area here, we've put some quarter-mile circles around those two bus stop locations. That quarter mile is what Metro Transit staff considers served by transit. And so the majority of the density of the proposed development falls within those 2 quarter-mile radiuses. And Metro Transit staff has indicated that they consider those areas served by the existing Route 6. So the ongoing transit network redesign is will present 2 contrasting options, one focusing on coverage and one focusing on ridership. The Metro staff's feeling is that the actual design completed later this year will likely kind of fall somewhere between the 2 ends of the spectrum. And it's also their working assumption that because this area has existing multifamily land uses and then also some proposed, that elimination of all-day transit service is unlikely, and service on Portage Road and Hayes will remain. But service on Portage Road north of Hayes may or may not be added. The route structure will need to change due to BRT because of the elimination of Route 6, but Metro staff feels that something service will be there just under a different route number. And then finally, the last concern was about the lack of pedestrian and bike access to the American Center. Developing areas across the city often experience disconnected pedestrian and bicycle network for a period of time due to the fact that properties don't necessarily develop in a sequential order. The Hanson NDP area is not immune to these development patterns. And full connectivity may not be achieved in this area until development is, the area is fully developed. The proposed crossing of the interstate will likely occur when a WSDOT construction has a interstate construction project adjacent to the amendment area. Currently, WSDOT is conducting a study of the stretch of the interstate, and staff anticipates that that connection would happen with that WSDOT project. A connection to Hanson Road likewise would occur when development occurs in that area. So with that, happy to answer any questions.
Jeff, we'll first go to registrants for public comment. So the first registrant is Heather Alston Shannon, 5525 Portage Road, Madison, Wisconsin. Neither in support or opposition, wishing to speak. Heather, I see you there. You may begin when you're ready, and you've got 3 minutes.
Yeah, I don't have anything to comment on.
Okay, thank you. Our next registrant is Travis Davenport, 4207 Belgrove Lane, Madison, Wisconsin. Neither in support or opposition, wishing to speak. Travis, yeah, whenever you're ready, you may begin. You have 3 minutes.
I've got nothing as well.
Okay, thank you. Next registrant is Sue Pastor, 2502 Green Ridge Drive, Madison. In opposition, wishing to speak. Sue, you may begin when you're ready. You have 3 minutes. Can you hear me, Sue? You're unmuted on our end. we'll try to come back to Sue. Next registrant is Laura Lee Fry, 5505 Portage Road, Madison, Wisconsin. Neither in support or opposition, wishing to speak. Laura, if you're ready, you may begin. You have 3 minutes.
Me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I wasn't sure. I've never done this before.
Well, welcome.
Most of my questions were regarding traffic volume on Portage Road, and that looks like it's down the road a ways. The other question I do have is traffic on Hanson Road, particularly as they are planning on possibly building a new bus barn in the old FedEx building. And I'm wondering how those buses, having them coming back and forth, there is no left turn on Hanson onto 51. So I would assume if they are going south, they would go on Portage Road unless they put a traffic light on Hanson Road. And
so,
that pretty
continue.
That pretty much is the question I have, is what is the plan for traffic on Hanson itself as the increase in volume? There's a lot of traffic that has changed since the hospital went in on Portage Road and Hanson Road.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Are there any questions for the speaker? All right, seeing none, we'll try Sue Pastor again. Sue, I can see you in our queue, and I believe we'll have you unmuted on our end. Can you hear me? Okay, looks like we're having some trouble getting through to Sue. All right, so for now, we'll go to questions for staff. We may try to come back to Sue after we're done with questions. So any questions for Jeff? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think mostly my primary concerns are still around the trip generation and transportation to the schools. And thanks for the additional info that you shared in that report. Did you happen to have any more specific information around how this would compare to travel for other students in Madison? I know the report mentions sort of adjacent school districts, and I know that's not uncommon to have City of Madison residents, students going to different districts, but it does seem like a really long trip. Do you know how this would compare to those kind of what is typical, or even what the kind of extreme examples are currently? And then also, do you have any information on, it mentions that potentially there would be a new elementary at some point, and it said that would reduce the trip. Do you know where that proposed location is, and how, and what the sort of new travel distance would be?
To, I guess, answer your first question, I don't have any specifics as far as kind of the other school districts. I know on the east side, in the northeast neighborhoods, there's a new development, Woods Farm. Those folks go to Sun Prairie schools. I would say they probably have similar bus rides or trips to the Sun Prairie schools. I know on the far west side, there's some folks in the Middleton School District off of Gammon Road. They need to find their ways to the Middleton School Districts. I would wager to guess it's probably a little less than, this 7 or 8 mile journey. But those are two anecdotal examples that I'm aware of as far as how it works for some of these other school districts. If you can give me a minute, I can pull up the NDP for the Pumpkin Hollow and show you the general location that's planned for the school. So let's see. The area we're talking about is just off the map. Are you seeing my screen? I don't know that I shared that properly. Are you seeing a Pumpkin Hollow? Okay. So the amendment area is just south of the Hanson Road text here. The proposed school site is kind of central to the Pumpkin Hollow neighborhood. And the schools that we're talking about are north of up in this general location. So essentially, just eyeballing it, I have not taken done a Google Maps measurement, but it's roughly in the neighborhood of about half the distance. I would guess maybe between half and maybe cut off a third, somewhere in that neighborhood. So that would.
And is there a projected timeline for that school, or what's the status with that?
I am unaware of any projected timeline for that school. Pumpkin Hollow neighborhood we're starting to get some development proposals kind of for this area at Hepker and the interstate, the area I'm circling here. As soon as sanitary and water are extended across the interstate to serve this development, I would expect the development of the Pumpkin Hollow neighborhood to accelerate. That's kind of the thing that's holding this area back from development. My understanding is somewhere in the 2023 timeframe is the current estimate of the extension of that sewer and water. Optimistic time frame, 5 years. Likely time frame, maybe 10 to 15 years. But again, those are maybe somewhat educated guesses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Figueroa Cole, please go ahead.
On the same line of questions from Grant, two questions. I missed the part about the school age for the kids. Are these various schools, or is this just replacing the one school that you point in there? Are they middle schoolers or high schoolers? How does that go?
So this amendment area would be served by elementary, middle, and high school. The area I was pointing out is a site reserved for a school. I think that's yet to be determined whether that's elementary, middle, or high school. My guess is it's either going to be elementary or middle school. But again, this amendment area would be served by all three levels by the DeForest Area School District. But they are 7 to 9 miles. Yeah, the elementary school is 7 miles away, and the middle and high school are 9 currently.
Yeah, and you answered the second question. I just wanted to trying to understand if all the kids were going to be served by the same school district, or like Ally that has so many different locations, and that really is very detrimental for building community. But I mean, I get it's far, but it would be worse if they were split between multiple cities, and that's not the case here, correct?
Correct. It would all be DeForest Area School District.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. It looks like Sue Pastor has maybe called in addition to having a Zoom call in. So Sue, if you can hear me, if you're ready to speak, you may go ahead when you're ready.
Okay. It sounds like I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Sorry about the echo. I'm one of about 40 founding members of the Greater Sandburg Neighborhood Association. And this area is entirely within the boundaries of our neighborhood association. Some of what I'm going to say is a complete repeat of things we said in 2015 when Hidden Creek was being developed. At that time, our new alder, Simba Balde, was able to slow down the process and allow the neighborhood to work with the developer to make some important changes. Those changes were beneficial to the neighborhood, but they did not substantively address the issues, and those issues are back right now. Some of them you've alluded to, and I thank the Transportation Policy Board for addressing them. So let me just run through some of what they are. This is 546 new units that are not walkable to anything.
Real quick, can you try to mute yourself on your Zoom call and then maybe turn your turn your speakers off, like turn your volume all the way down? That might help.
Yeah, so you're muted on the Zoom. If you could just lower the speakers.
Okay, I think I got it now, right?
Yeah, it's a lot better.
Can
Thank
you still hear me? Yeah, I'm sorry about that. You know, I have to say, I hope I can still finish. I find this format so unnerving, and I'm used to 20 squares with just initials in them and teaching to them, and I'm still just completely unnerved by this. Okay. You've already alluded to the concern about development in this area. 546 new units, not walkable to anything, not groceries, not a corner store, not a coffee shop. We asked these questions when Hidden Creek was developed. This must certainly involve filling wetland. It's difficult for me to understand how this is not sprawl. We're encouraged to embrace development in downtown and the more urban parts of the city as an alternative to sprawl. But it seems to me that we have both. We have an elementary crossing down Portage. We have some traffic calming because the neighborhood worked to get that. That was the work of the Greater Sandburg Neighborhood Association. It's just hard. I'm having a challenge to understand how this isn't promoting car culture. And I guess finally, as I try to kind of collect myself here, it just seems way less than ideally participatory democracy to have moved this so quickly during the pandemic with so many barriers to engagement, including the one that I didn't set out to try to demonstrate to you today, right? If my cell phone wasn't charged, I wouldn't have been able to join the meeting that way. And thank goodness I figured out how not to keep echoing for you. So we said all these things in 2015. We obviously, those kinds of things were not seen as substantive issues vis-a-vis planning. I appreciate your addressing of them. We do think that bus barn traffic has to go somewhere, and certainly hope not down Portage, which, although it is a collector road and therefore not eligible for speed bumps for traffic calming, it does run right through neighborhoods. So I think that's everything, except I also just wanted to thank you for referring this last time and not simply passing it along with a rubber stamp. Your referral allowed me to get a little bit of information out to the neighborhood. Again, I think it would benefit from much more engagement, but I thank you for the attention that you've given it.
All right, thank you, Sue. Okay, are there any additional questions for staff? Or questions for the speaker, for that matter? All right, seeing none, is there a motion? Alder Foster?
I will move a recommendation to place on file.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second? Looks like Margaret is going to second. Discussion. Alder Foster, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah. I mean, it's a little bit difficult because the staff report, I think, clearly sort of kind of answered all of our questions and concerns in a way that seems to say there's, everything should be fine moving forward. I'd very much appreciate the goal of continuing to add housing units, and I think that's really clear in the report that this feels like an opportunity and a place to do that. I think the comment by the last speaker around the question of are we building sprawl, and are we building a neighborhood that will essentially make people car dependent? I don't see anything in this amendment to address that. And I know, I've raised some of these current concerns in other discussions, but our comp plan is really clear about the importance of building complete neighborhoods. And I don't see that how that happens with this. The question about access to schools, which certainly is not the only one. I did look up the Woods Farm area, and it looks to me that that's about 3.5 miles away from O'Keefe Elementary and Sun Prairie. So, half as far as what's being proposed here. I think about Alice School in my district and the residents that have to come from south of the Beltline to there. And that's been such an issue for that neighborhood and that community that's one of the priority things that just got passed in the referendum to build a new elementary school for that neighborhood. And that's about 6 miles that they've been getting taken to Alice Elementary. So I really struggle seeing how this is wise without addressing that question of building that complete neighborhood. So that's why I'm recommending placing on file at this time.
All right. Thank you, Alder Foster. Is there any further discussion? Alder Halverson, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple comments. We do know that there's a massive shortage of housing units in Madison, and when you have an opportunity to build some housing units to help alleviate that pressure, I think we need to look carefully about where we're doing that and if it's feasible to do that. I think there's been some concerns. I recognize my colleagues' concerns with this. This particular area, this particular housing area, as my understanding is, it is geared towards young professionals and or retired individuals who may take advantage of this opportunity. So I think we need to think about, again, we're in a massive shortage of housing currently, and it's going to take a lot of effort to open up that market more so that we can even get to the point of having more affordable housing. So I just would encourage everyone to consider that as you're making this decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, just a reminder that to both of our alternates, Margaret and Badri, that you will be in voting status for their entirety of the meeting. On the motion to place on file amending the Hanson Neighborhood Development Plan. So a yes vote is to place on file, a no vote will bring it back for a different motion. All those in favor of placing on file, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 No?
No.
Chair believes it was just one no. Badri, are there any other no's?
I wanted to say that.
Hold on, Badri. Were there any other no's?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so just one no, so that motion carries. So Badri, the opportunity to speak on the item typically happens before the vote. So that motion carries. That item is placed on file. And we'll move on to the next item. Legistar 65314, authorizing the contribution of the Brayton lot and the Junction Road parcel to the Madison Bus Rapid Transit Project as local match in lieu of cash contribution.
Good evening, everyone. Tom, I believe I'll take this one, but if you have things to add, please jump in. Is that how you want to handle it, Tom?
I stepped away for about 30 seconds, so why don't you go ahead and move forward?
So this is, it's actually a topic that we've discussed, I think, with this body before, but this action would contribute 2 pieces of property to the Bus Rapid Transit Project. And this would accomplish a couple different things. So I'll kind of take the 2 parcels separately and talk about them separately. So first, a parcel at 432 South Junction Road. And this is a parcel that the city purchased through the process of building out the Junction Road and Mineral Point intersection. This parcel we're proposing to have as the end of line facility for the Bus Rapid Transit. So that would give us an off-street location in which we can lay over the bus. So typically at the end of the line, the bus will sit for 10 plus minutes to recoup its schedule time and give the driver some break time. It would have a restroom facility for the drivers so that they have some facilities to use during that break. It would also give us our charging location for our electric buses. So again, we want to try to do as much of this off-street as possible. So during that 10 to 15 minutes the bus is sitting there, it will be charging and the driver will be using the facilities. And then potentially use as a park and ride lot with whatever space is left over there. Again, this is a, we'll have more discussions around what the final configuration looks like there and what amenities are included later. This action here is just to contribute that parcel of land to the project for purposes of the project. And with both of these parcels, one thing that's important to note is that we can reduce our local borrowing that's required to go towards the project by making these contributions. So the way that it works from the FTA's perspective is that essentially the project is buying this piece of land and the city is contributing the value of that land in lieu of cash. So we're able to reduce our borrowing by contributing this land instead. And that saves us quite a bit of bonding that we would have to do for the project. But specifically for this this Junction Road parcel, it's a needed off-street location in which to do charging and driver facilities. The other parcel that we're proposing for here is what's commonly known as the Brayton lot, 1 South Butler Street downtown. This is a little bit different in that the project would not be using the parcel permanently. Instead, we would be using that parcel for construction staging. So it's a centrally located piece of land where contractors can store equipment, can store station structures, things like that, while they stage them to go out to be installed in the field. The FTA allows us to purchase a property for construction staging purposes for temporary construction use. And again, in this case, because the city already owns that, it allows us to contribute the value of that land in lieu of cash. And so once the temporary construction purpose is complete, i.e. the construction is done and we no longer have need for construction staging, we can repurpose that lot, that parcel, using what FTA calls joint development. So basically, we can solicit developers to redevelop that lot. That lot is I think one that's been targeted for redevelopment for quite some time and is obviously a very high value parcel downtown. And so we would solicit developers much like we would for any city-owned parcel downtown. The only requirements are that it be a transit supportive land use. So in this case, single family residential on cul-de-sacs or, warehousing probably would not apply for being transit supported. But I don't think anyone would propose uses like that on a lot like this in the middle of downtown. And so I think any use restrictions would be very much in line with what we plan to do anyway. And the other piece is that we recoup from that developer at least the federal share in that parcel. So in this case, the feds are contributing roughly 70% to the project. And so they in turn would be, of the value of that property of around $9 or $10 million, they would be contributing that $6.5 to $7 million. And so we'd have to make sure to recoup that amount from the developer. And then that amount, that whatever proceeds we get from the developer do need to go towards supporting Metro's operational budget. So that, for Metro in turn, it provides another conduit for us to overcome some of our structural deficits because state and fare revenues are not growing. And so it provides another funding source for us to fund the operation of the BRT going forward. That joint development developer agreement can take a lot of different forms. It could just be where they purchase the property and we put some restrictions on it on what they can build. Or more commonly with this program, we structure a land lease where a developer pays a certain amount of time over a 50-year, 75-year period for the rights to that land. And it's, again, it can have a full spectrum in between, but those are some of the common ways that's structured. I think I've covered, so yeah, all of this combined, provide us a construction staging location, provides us an off-street end-of-line location for charging and facilities, while also reducing the borrowing needed to support the BRT project by around $10 million. So, all in, staff feels this is a very strong proposal and makes a lot of sense for both the city and the BRT project. Happy to answer any questions.
Let me just check here to see if there's a... Okay, questions for staff. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I think I recall seeing a map of hold on a second, I'm moving around between things here. The park and ride location at some point, I don't remember whether it was at TC or 2PBB. Is this address the same as it's been, the Junction Road 432? Is that the same address that we've seen in other earlier presentations?
Yes, we've discussed that lot as the end of line location before.
I think that's all then. It just looked further south than I remembered it, but I think I remember liking the depictions before. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Alder Furman, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Justin, the Brayton lot obviously is sort of owned and operated by the parking utility, right?
Yep. It's technically it's owned by the city generally, but operated by the parking utility.
What does the parking utility get from giving up this property, other than helping the city with debt for BRT?
Tom, I don't know if you want.
Well, we're one big team, right? And so it does mean that, I guess there's a variety of ways that this parking could be replaced, right? This could have a development where the parking utility owns some of the parking, condo arrangement similar to what we have with the Wilson Street garage. It could be something where the parking utility chooses not to own any of it. And so the revenues for the parking utility would be just generated from the other parking garages. This creates a revenue stream for Metro Transit, okay, but it also will remove a little bit of a revenue stream from the parking utility. And perhaps because I'm the director, I don't see boundaries between these silos. I feel like we're kind of a transportation organization. An example is like, for instance, Milwaukee. Their light rail is actually technically supported by parking revenues, and they've stopped calling it a parking general fund, but they call it a transportation fund. So there are, I think right now the revenues generated from the Brayton lot are slightly above about $500,000 a year. Okay, and so some of that will be transferred to other lots, that's just a thing. We do have a lease with the state van pools, and we are obligated to provide them a place to park their vans, but we don't have to park them at the Brayton lot. And so there's other lots that are close by, both surface transportation as well as structured parking lots where those vans could occur.
And Tom, one thing we did do a very cursory analysis of property tax revenues that the parcel might generate in a future development, and it was, like Tom mentioned, I think the parking utility revenues were around 600,000 or a little less, but we estimated that property tax revenues from that site being on the tax rolls would be closer to $1 million. So it would net out to a net improvement in revenue for the city.
Okay, but yeah, we obviously then the parking utility will also not see any sort of benefit when this property is sold. So, besides the revenue that they obviously have their own funds that they use to develop new parking garages, etc. So this is the city just making a policy decision that investing in Metro is more important in this situation. Is that a good, accurate representation of what we're doing here?
Yes, I want to clarify that this does not preclude parking from continuing an interest in the Brayton lot. That would be a decision that the city would make in the future. We do have a joint development, with the Wilson Street garage, which is good or bad, depending on how you feel about that as a policymaker. The city does have to maintain continuous control, and it does have to become a transit supportive use. And I will say that, I've only been here for 3 years, but it seems as though discussions with other staff members that, for a decade, many staff have felt like the highest and best use of the Brayton lot is not as a surface parking lot, but as creating jobs and development and tax dollars. And so, but the thing is that we've just really had only so much capacity, and we just haven't had if you think about the Beitler property and all the dynamics that have gone with that, there just hasn't been an internal capacity to just move forward with bringing the Brayton lot to the next step. Well, this doesn't necessarily bring Brayton lot to the next step, but it puts it in the queue saying, we're going to use it for BRT construction staging. And then we are going to move forward with the Brayton lot and bring it to the next step, because its highest and best and its greatest service to the community is not as a surface parking lot, but as something more.
Yeah, no, I think I don't think anybody could disagree that being used as a surface lot is a terrible use of the property, and it's exciting to think about it being used for something else. Obviously, and Tom, parking falls underneath your department, and so I know you're sensitive as well about their budget issues and their deficits, etc. And so hopefully that they're at least kept in mind for future development and how that works out, because I think it's important that we they exist as an entity, and we're certainly taking a lot of money from them at times, and this is just another example. So just want to at least make sure that continues to be on the surface and on the radar as this is thought about long term.
Yeah, and I'll emphasize what you stated, and I think what most of you know is that the parking utility funds with the COVID crisis are very challenged right now. And so the concern that you express, Alderperman, is a real concern, and it just needs to be addressed holistically by the city.
And obviously, supporting public transportation means we should need less parking. So that does make sense. But I appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderperman. Margaret, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, you've already answered one of my questions, which was the revenue stream that we're getting from Brayton Lot. And I can say that when the city came to take possession of this lot, I was serving on the Transit and Parking Commission. I think Ann Kovich, who's on this call, was also on at the time. And clearly, I don't see how anyone could think of that parcel having its highest and best use as a surface lot. I think the city took possession with the intention of eventually redeveloping it somehow. However, in the meantime, since you mentioned that we do have the obligation to the state to provide parking for the van pool, and since the van pool, at least in the past, has predominantly served state and county employees and university employees to a lesser extent. And you said we have other lots we could move those vans to. I'm just curious where. And I'm also curious, how long do we anticipate using this as a staging area? How long do we anticipate needing it as a staging area?
You go ahead, Justin, okay. And I'll add to it.
Yeah, so really it's just through the duration of construction. So, starting kind of at the end of 2022 through summer of 2024.
Yes, and so we've explored a couple of options with Sabrina. She's mentioned the Wilson lot, which is about the same distance from the Jeff building as the current Brayton lot. She's also mentioned the Capitol Square North Garage. And I think we could also perhaps do Wilson. So those are some of the options that are being explored. I think if you were to draw a line from the Jeff building, the options, they would require maybe 1 or 2 more blocks worth of walking for a state employee. Oftentimes, though, it seems as though the van pools, like the driver goes to get the van, but then the van kind of pulls up in front of the state. Right. So I don't know if it would be all people using the van pool would experience that extra distance, but it would be the thing. And we don't necessarily have to, we could maintain, 15% of the lot and keep vans there. We don't think that's probably the best thing to do, but I don't think that decision has been finally made. If we had to, we could withhold a portion of the Brayton lot so that they could park some vans if we wanted to.
Yeah, and I don't recall the details of the arrangement if the state is paying us for the use of those spots.
Yeah, they do. So the agreement basically says that we have to provide them spaces in perpetuity. I mean, it goes on forever, but they pay us whatever our market rates are, and so that's how it works right now.
Okay. So that's good to hear that they pay market rates at least, so that we're not paying. This isn't a double cost of lost income on Brayton and then also lost income on, say, Capitol North, which had pretty high occupancy rates. So that's good news. Final question, and this is just, do we have any idea how any of this might be syncing up with the reconfiguration, reuse, rebuilding of the Jeff building? How's your magic ball?
Yeah. Well, I think the legislature, the governor proposed reuse and reconstruction of the Jeff building, and I think the legislature in their budget proposal has kind of dismissed that proposal. I do have information from employees that are working in that Jeff building that they are scheduled to be moved, and so it's we have our challenges, and I think the state has their challenges.
Thank you. Those were my questions.
Thank you, Margaret. Any additional questions? All right. Is there a motion? Alder Foster.
I would move a recommendation for approval.
There's a motion. Is there a second? Second by Alder Furman. Any discussion? Alder Foster, would you like to speak to your motion?
Nope.
Okay, then on the motion to recommend approval of a resolution authorizing on the motion to approve, on a motion to recommend authorizing the contribution of the Brayton lot and the Junction Road parcel to the Madison Bus Rapid Transit Project as a local match in lieu of cash contribution. All those in favor, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes unanimous.
Chair, Badri had his hand up. He wanted to speak before we took the vote.
I'm sorry, I didn't see you, Badri. Go ahead.
I thought that was the discussion point there. I just wanted to just bring as a comment there, no questions. It's a good idea to use that not as a open parking lot there. I work in Jeff building, so I know a lot of staff there. It's not just about the van pools. Most of the parking that happens there as well is a lot of them are carpooling people that are coming from out of town. So I just wanted to see whatever comes in future, if you having that option of still continuing to have some kind of not only van pool, carpool as well as an option, probably a good thing to have in future. We just, we've been all asked to come back to work starting next month. So everybody's going to start coming back to the buildings again. And then we take out this, I hear from staff all the time complaining that they have a really hard time finding parking, especially people coming from out of town. And we're taking out for Jeff buildings, if we take out that option out for carpoolers, they have to start coming back as single vehicles again. We are forcing them to come back as individual vehicles again. So having some kind of park, whatever in future that building is going to be, having that option of pool, carpools, right? So most of the parking lots has a first dib at waiting list for people who has carpool. So that might help if they have something for these parking lots in future.
Well, that's an interesting thought. Right now, our parking garages are significantly under occupancy.
Because all of the state employees are working from home, and we are all told to start coming from next month, July 5th. Everybody has to come back to work.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting. But I think you raise an interesting policy. It's an interesting policy thing. Is should preference be given to people renting that are carpooling? I think that might be hard to verify or enforce, but I think that's interesting.
At one point of time, I knew that most of these parking lots had waiting lists where only carpoolers were given the first priority than the single vehicles.
Yeah.
All All right, thank you, Badri. So I believe it was all ayes. If you'd like for the short no vote, please raise your hand. Okay, so that recommendation passes unanimously. All right, next item, Legistar 65315, resolution authorizing the negotiation of a non-competitive contract with New Flyer to purchase bus rapid transit vehicles as a sole source provider.
Sorry, unmuted. That's me again. So this is a fairly quite unique situation that I'm bringing to you all regarding the purchase of vehicles for the bus rapid transit. We're still, 9 months or so away from being able to actually execute a contract or move forward with a council approval of a contract for vehicles. We need to get everything in the budget. We need to clear our environmental hurdles. But what I'm presenting to you today is regarding a pre-approval for a sole source for those vehicles. Normally, the process would be that we document and justify a sole source and then go through the process and then bring that ultimate contract to you for approval and approval as a sole source solicitation. This contract is going to be large, in the neighborhood of $60 million, and the procurement process very long, potentially 9 months or more. And so what I'm asking here for is a pre-approval of that sole source to make sure that everyone's on record as approving that as we move forward with those contract negotiations. So specifically why it's important for this to be a sole source, to be completely transparent, there is no other option. These are, we need to have 60-foot buses with left side doors. And those need to meet all of the requirements from the federal funding statutes. And there is only one vendor who meets all of those requirements. And we've done a request for information for all the vendors to confirm that fact. And we did get, letters on letterhead from each of the vendors telling us what they could provide, and did confirm through that process that only one vendor can meet those requirements. So there's two pieces here of what the federal government requirements are. One is around the FTA and what they call their Altoona testing and Buy America compliance. So this is a process that they go through, and they have a list of bus vendors that are approved for federal procurement. Bus vendors have to submit a bus to a testing facility in Altoona, Pennsylvania, where they go through a series of durability tests, as well as a certification that the buses meet Buy America requirements. So a certain percentage of the bus's content comes from American sources. Until a bus has gone through that testing and has been approved by FTA, you cannot use federal money on those buses. And that's largely intended on the durability side to make sure that when FTA is investing a lot of money in a bus, they actually will last the 12 years that they're slated to last. And so that's the piece of Altoona testing. And that process takes several years. And so there's no viable situation in which a new vendor could enter the market right now and have a bus go through that testing process in time for us to execute a contract for the BRT. It's not feasible at this point. And so there are only 2 manufacturers that have gone through that process with a 60-foot bus with doors on the left side as well as the right side. And those are New Flyer as well as BYD. Last year, or actually at the very end of 2019, the federal government passed another law that was targeting Chinese-owned companies that were essentially coming in and undercutting the market in the United States. And specifically precluded BYD as a vendor eligible for federal funding. And so with that takes them out of the market, leaving only New Flyer as a vendor that has a 60-foot bus with left side doors that meets all of these requirements for federal funding. So that's what we're proposing to you today, is that you authorize that we can proceed with a contract negotiation with New Flyer, and bring that final contract back to council for final approval. But this is just having the council on record as approving this sole source negotiation. One thing that is probably of concern is the actual pricing, right? Obviously, a big reason why we don't normally do sole source procurements is because, pricing tends to be worse when you have a sole source situation. However, in this situation, we have ample pricing data from other entities, other public transit entities with, open records laws about what they are paying for these exact buses. And so we have, as well as FTA does an audit of all of the materials during that Altoona test to make sure that, pricing is not completely out of line. So, in this case, we have very, very strong data to know what the appropriate pricing is in a competitive market. And so we have that ammunition to start our negotiations. I think the flip side in this situation, so the alternate path here is that we go ahead and do an RFP in which we know and they know they will be the only respondent that will meet the requirements. And in that case, they can propose whatever price they would like. And that's basically what we're stuck with. And so by pursuing this as a sole source, we have the leverage to continue to negotiate pricing with them. And ultimately our last, if they, for some reason or another, which I don't expect, they try to raise the price on us beyond what other entities are paying. We have the option to try and redesign the system around a 40-foot bus or right side door bus, but I don't think that that's going to be the case, and that won't be an issue for us. So, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Tom, you're muted.
Thank you. We do have one registered for public comment, Bob Schaefer, Madison, Wisconsin, in opposition, wishing to speak. Bob, I see you there. You begin when you're ready. You've got 3 minutes.
Yes, and Tom, that I was also registered on the last agenda item, but it got overlooked. So if I may, then make a comment about the last agenda item as well.
Please keep your comments to this agenda item. I believe you registered for that item after we began speaking about the item. And once we begin taking up an item, registration is no longer possible.
Okay. It was puzzling to me because it accepted my thing. Anyhow, yes, I think that that much of the BRT system is built not on fact, but on hopes. That one of the things that is not being considered in terms of the whole BRT system is that it doesn't work well unless you get the ridership. And that over the last 10 years, Metro ridership, while it appears to be increasing when it's calculated the way that Metro calculates it, last year, or 2019, was the second lowest of the last 10 years. But that doesn't take into consideration the population growth. So the population growth, instead of the 21 million riders, that ought to have been a ridership of 25 to 29 million, depending upon which population figures that you include. The BRT system that I've seen in your presentation currently at this point in time does not show any way of connecting the local buses to the BRT system in a way that people can transfer easily because of the side door station loading platforms that the current buses are not able to take advantage of. So there's a lot of things that I think that are missing from this. And in conjunction with that, national reporting seems to indicate a decline in public transportation. And with the change in virtual home working, that public transportation could see, as well as private transportation could see, a decline in that use. So I think that we're putting the cart before the horse, or we're building a field of dreams. But in a field of dreams, more people like to watch baseball than ride buses. And that I've suggested in the past that at this point in time, Madison does a preliminary kind of quasi BRT system with the current buses to see how much people are going to use a bus that stops less frequently, and kind of dovetailing on the last one is that when you make the end stations also have restroom facilities for the drivers, are the public going to be able to use that as well? And who's going to take care of the maintenance of that?
Thank you, Bob.
I do have all of this documentation in terms of the ridership numbers. I do have that all calculated and is available for anybody to see and take a crack at proving me wrong.
Thank you, Bob. Are there any questions for the speaker? Seeing none, questions for staff? All right, seeing no questions, is there a motion? Or questions or discussion, I suppose? Alder Foster?
I would move a recommendation for approval.
Thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second? Second by Alder Furman. Any discussion? Alder Foster, would you like to speak to the motion?
Just briefly, I think Justin went over it quite well. As he said, this is a very extraordinary situation, and we certainly don't like to make habits of doing this sort of a thing. But in this specific case, I think the rationale that he's laid out makes sense, and I think this is the best path forward to get us the best contract on these buses.
Alder Furman, please go ahead.
I just want to add very briefly to what Alder Foster said. I mean, I had a great chat with Justin about this and pushed him really hard because it is bothersome to have a single source contract like this. But as Justin explained this evening, I think there are plenty of checks in place to make sure that we're not being taken advantage of by the company. So thank you for your work, Justin, and I look forward to you making sure that is the case.
Thank you, Alder Furman. Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to agree with Alder Furman's comments and add that I've been watching the development of this market for a number of years, and it gives me great pause to approve a no bid contract of this size. It's not the best practice, obviously, unless you are in a situation where you truly do have only one provider. And unfortunately, that is the case at the moment. And I don't think any of the vehicles, electric vehicles have been problem-free. Then again, I'd be challenged to think of any vehicle that's been completely problem-free when it first hit the market, or even 5 years, 10 years into it. So I am going to take the unusual step of supporting this motion, which under different circumstances I would not.
Thank you, Margaret. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, On the motion to recommend approval of a resolution authorizing the negotiation of a non-competitive contract with New Flyer to purchase bus rapid transit vehicles as a sole source provider. All those in favor, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that will go down as unanimous. Okay, our next item is Legistar 65385, amending the 2021 adopted operating budget for the Planning Division, $110,000, Economic Development Division, $100,000, and Department of Transportation, $80,000, authorizing the Transit General Manager to file an application for a Section 20005B pilot program, for transit-oriented development planning discretionary grant with the U.S. Department of Transportation, and authorizing the mayor and the city clerk to execute the associated grant agreement with U.S. DOT and the 13C agreement with Teamsters Local 695.
Is me again. This is a fairly routine item. We did have a grant opportunity that came up that we were uniquely positioned very well for. And so it was one of those grants that we can use towards staff time and that we're almost guaranteed success in our application. And that is around an FTA program that encourages planning and zoning changes around making the city more conducive to rapid transit. That pot of money is only open to those who are in the pipeline for a federal small starts or new starts project. And I think the grant maximum is relatively low, I think in the 500,000 to $1 million neighborhood. So essentially, we were almost assured of getting this. And so we looked at ways that we could leverage our existing programs, that efforts that we're already doing to be qualified for this program. And so we didn't. And so the three pieces, it's a total of 290,000, of which 110,000 goes towards the planning division. Again, for much of the land use planning around BRT that it's already planned. 100,000 to economic development for market study and land banking. Again, this is all work that was planned to be done anyway, and so this brings us additional federal money. And then 80,000 to the transportation department related to pedestrian bicycle planning. So again, this is federal money to support programs we were already planning to do, and this step really just allows us to incorporate this into the budget. I think Tom might have something to add as well.
Yeah, so what this will do is, right now in our zoning code, we have a transit overlay design district, an overlay district that's never been used. And so we used initial planning monies with the help of Cherubi, if you remember, where they did kind of outline areas around each one of our BRT stations. What could we do there? What changes would be needed? And so this will help take that effort to the next step so we can actually implement it and provide incentives, transit supportive land for transit supportive land uses around there. And as Justin mentioned, actually, Justin was the one that brought this to our attention. And so it'll help take us to the next step on this. Unlike the TDM ordinance, the TOD ordinance, an overlay district will be led by the planning division.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions? Seeing no questions, is there a motion? Audrey.
I have a motion for approval.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second? Looks like Chris. Any discussion? Audrey, did you want to speak to your motion?
Yep, good.
Okay, last call for discussion. On the motion to recommend approval of amending the 2021 adopted operating budget for the Planning Division, 110,000, Economic Development Division, 100,000, and Department of Transportation, 80,000, authorizing the Transit General Manager to file an application for a Section 20005B pilot program for transit-oriented development planning discretionary grant with the U.S. Department of Transportation, and authorizing the mayor and the city clerk to execute the associated grant agreement with U.S. DOT and the 13C agreement with Teamsters Local 695. All those in favor, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that will go down as unanimous. Our next item is Legistar 65868, request for public hearing about Metro Transit fare policy changes at August 2nd, 2021 meeting.
And that's me again. So I presented fare collection strategies to you all a little over a month ago and promised that we'd be back to discuss more. And so we had a long discussion with the city's attorney's office around, whether we should do a public hearing versus a public information meeting. This is it's a very dense set of materials that we really wanted a public information meeting for people to be able to dive into and ask a lot more questions than they would be able to in a public hearing setting. And so ultimately we took kind of an unusual step of doing both. And so we are planning to do release the detailed memo sometime later this month, have a public meeting, public information meeting, I think July 21st, I believe, or late July. And then we'll have a public hearing with this body August 2nd, assuming that you're willing to do so. So this action is just allowing us to set that public hearing up for the August 2nd meeting.
Are there any questions? Margaret, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to be clear which fare policy it is that we would be hearing. Is this the discussion of fare free versus not, or is this some particular set of increases, or is it the agreement with the Madison Metropolitan School District for the free passes for students this summer?
Sure. Sorry, I should have clarified that a bit more. This is what we're the roughly hour-long proposal or presentation I did, I think, in early May on the overall fare policy in terms of fare collection technologies and fare capping and all of that. And so, what we'd be presenting our recommendations, but along the way also describing the analysis we did to get to that point, including the analysis of the fare-free idea. But ultimately, we'd be seeking approval, again, not today, but at a later date, for our recommended fare system technology, so that we could go out for an RFP for technology for it.
And we did have one register for public comments. I'm going to go to that register quickly. We had Bob Schaefer, Madison, Wisconsin, neither in opposition nor in support, wishing to speak. Bob, are you still with us? We don't see him anymore.
No, Bob is no longer in attendance.
Okay. Then I believe the next question was Alder Foster. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just wanted to pull up the question or suggestion that we heard from Mr. Becker earlier on around people associated with the UW that will be gone over the summer. I don't think we normally sort of delay public hearings, et cetera, over the summer months, but I'm wondering if it sounds like you're suggesting doing the public information meeting in July with the public hearing in August. I think you just mentioned at the end of your last statement about that is some sort of prerequisite to be able to go out and move forward with some of the technology components. Can you just speak to the impact it would have if we did want to hold off on the public hearing until September versus August? what the impact would have on your team.
Sure. And yeah, you're absolutely right that, normally with any service changes, we would not do those types of public information and hearings in the summer. This situation is a bit unique in that UW students and employees already, would not, if anything, they would be benefited by this. Since the payment is, all of the payment is covered through those partner pass agreements. If anything, this would allow us to just incorporate with student IDs, and otherwise it would operate in much the same way as it always has for students and staff. So that's why we felt it was okay to do this in the summer. If we did decide to delay into September, it just delays our process. I think it wouldn't be the end of the world for sure. It would make it a little bit more difficult to coordinate it with our broader technology project. So right now the FAIR technology is one piece, and all of our GPS location systems is another piece, and they're moving forward kind of in parallel with each other. But this would, force us to either keep them out of sync with each other or delay the other piece as well. But it certainly wouldn't be the end of the world.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder Foster. I'll point out briefly that John Becker is still with us, and because this was the item that he had spoke on, if there are questions from the board for the speaker, it would be appropriate to ask them if they do come up. Baltazar, go ahead.
Thank you, Justin. So a question, if you can just describe just a little bit, like what will the public hearing entail, and who will be invited, and I'm just trying to figure out like who might be missing out of that opportunity.
So and I realize it's also unique to do a public hearing in TPPP, but because this is a policy issue rather than a implementation issue. Typically, our public hearings are done with service changes or bus stop changes or things like that would be here at TC. And so that's why this is different, because it's a very in-depth policy discussion question. So that's why it would come here. But specifically to your question, it's open to everyone. Everyone is invited to attend. We would give a brief presentation, a kind of summarized version of what we presented back in May to you, and also what we would present in the public information meeting later in July. And then we would give the opportunity for people to provide their comments in a more structured official format, where they, much in the way that they provide comments on action items here, people can provide those comments. And I think typically with TC, an action from the board is not made in that same day. So basically, it's just an opportunity for public to comment, and then we would come back to you at a later meeting after that for an action, whether or not you, based on the public comment that you received, whether or not you want to support the proposal as proposed, or if you want to make changes to it.
Thank you. I think, we did Latino Academy. We participated at a number of focus groups with NPO, and one of the things that we heard a lot from our students and participants was that if they knew about using Metro, if they learned, if they knew about the system, that they will use it. That was one of the things that we learned. And many of them were saying, I don't know how to use Metro, so I just use my car, so that's something that came out of that focus group, and which, Zia is going to share that with many folks. So, I'm just trying to figure out, how do we make this accessible to, and maybe traditionally we have not brought, make it diverse or inclusive, or maybe we have, I have no idea. But I just put it out there that this, maybe we can start bringing other community folks into this. So they can be part of that conversation. And that's why I don't know how deep this is gonna be. I don't know how difficult. And I know you're already doing a lot of work with this, but I was through that focus group. We have a focus group with 31 participants, and one of the things that came out is we need to learn a little bit about Metro, because we don't know about Metro in order for us to be able to use it. And this might be an opportunity, that where they can, some of our students or community members, they can feel that they are part of some of these decisions. And I don't know how we can make that happen. Anyway, I don't know if it's something that I'm suggesting or just a thought, and maybe, if this public hearing is available to everybody, maybe to bring some, interpreters, so folks can have that opportunity to provide their own voice. I think that will be a good start.
Thank you, Baltazar. Are there any further questions? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Not a question, but just to follow up on what Baltazar was saying. I think we talked a little bit earlier about our community engagement as it related to the network redesign project, and then we've got kind of going on now or this week, the sort of beginnings of the Let's Talk Street to get engagement around Vision Zero and completing green streets, and sort of understand why those two processes are separate. And then this one, is also different and on its own. And it also does feel, as you said, Justin, it's pretty important, policy decision. And I think one that has the potential to really impact marginalized communities in particular. So, we've often struggled a bit as a city to how do we effectively get that authentic engagement on these kinds of specific proposals. So I'm sure your team is already thinking about kind of how to do that and what that would look like for that public meeting. But I just wanted to highlight, I think in particular, this one, would really be worth going a little bit above and beyond to figure that out. And I don't know if that's even kind of taking a little bit of the cue from the Let's Talk Streets, where we have maybe two sessions just to give a little bit more opportunity, and then trying to connect with some of those community partners to help spread the word. And again, these are probably things that you're already thinking about, but just want to really reinforce and highlight that I think this is an important one to try and spread this far and wide and hear from a variety of folks on this issue.
Yeah, we are planning to, in addition to the kind of large official meetings, also go to some of the smaller, NRTs and things like that to kind of prime this issue. Now, obviously, we don't. It's difficult to spend an hour and a half getting into the nitty-gritty details in a meeting like that, and so we do have to simplify the message a bit in those meetings. But hopefully, use that as a tool to educate folks, but also get them interested in coming to the larger meetings so they can really learn more.
All right, thank you. Any further questions or comments? All right, then I guess I'd be looking for a motion. Alder Foster.
I would move approval of setting up a public hearing for the August TPPB meeting.
Thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second? I see a second by Badri. Any discussion? Alder Foster, do you want to speak any further to your motion? Okay. Any discussion generally? Seeing none, on the motion to approve a request for public hearing about Metro Transit fare policy changes at our August 2nd, 2021 meeting, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. Chair believes it's unanimous. If you'd like to register a no vote, please raise your hand. Seeing no hands raised, that will go down as unanimous. Thank you. Our next item is Legistar 65870, bike network increase metrics.
This presentation is going to be extremely brief, but it's just meant to introduce the subject. So I'm going to share my screen. The next subject will be a little bit more substantive. Do this. As we became a NACTO city, we had to fill out an application, and part of that application included, questions like, do we have certain goals for facilities, linear goals or mode shift goals? Examples are, do we have goals for the number of bike lanes that we put in, or transit lanes and the like? And at the time of our application, we really don't, and we didn't. And then, consequently, if you look at some of the NACTO different materials, this one was a publication, NACTO Green Light for Great Streets. This was published in the fall of 2018. This is just prior to when we became a NACTO city. But, it inventoried, roughly between 15 and 20 cities and how they're implementing different types of things. And they did have performance targets, and they showed, does the city have performance targets either for mode shift or for, linear goals, such as miles of facilities implemented. And in Madison, we don't. You can see many of the NACTO cities do. We currently don't. There's different ways to do those goals, but and we still, as we say, we still currently do not have targets for bicycle facilities, transit lanes, and the like. I do believe we have goals for mode shift. We are, though, tracking, the types of bicycle facilities that we are putting in, just so that we report it to NACTO, we report it to various other organizations, but it's also good for us. We really don't, you actually make progress in things you measure. And if you don't measure things, then you're unlikely to make progress in those things. And so these are the individual projects. I believe there's probably more than 30 spread out over 4 years where we are trying to put in some bike facilities. 2020 is 3.6. We have plans for 2021 of 7.7 miles of bike facilities. Now, not all of these are protected or all age disabilities, but at least they are some type of facility. 22 is 3.4. 2023 is 3.7. 2024, we don't have much planned right now. I just wanted to show you that we are tracking this, and that this warrants another discussion. Should we have targets where we try and do things? And there's different ways of doing targets. Like here's we do our targets based on policy. Do we do our targets based on plan, or do we, prioritize basically opportunities? And I want to say that these primarily have been opportunities. We've seen opportunities where we could implement bike improvements. And if you take advantage of opportunities over 20 or 30 years, like the city of Madison has, you develop a decent bike network. I'm not saying that that's how we necessarily want to do it forever, but we have built on the efforts of Arthur Ross and others past, and because of that, we're Platinum City right now. However, we do have room to improve. One thing that recently came out was the People for Bikes organization just came out with their ratings. We are still rated very high. We're 54. We're in the top either 94th or 95th percentile for education and overall city ranking. We have dropped a space or two. And so, we acknowledge that some of that has to do with community engagement and how our outreach has been. But that's something that may be of interest to you. And I think this really literally just came out in the last 2 days. So we haven't really discussed it, but we did submit the data that gave us its rating and ranking. So I just wanted to introduce that subject right now.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions? Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thanks, Tom. I guess more feedback than questions, but I really appreciate you bringing it and definitely support us setting targets. I think we can probably all understand why that's helpful and important. I guess one thought comes to mind for me in terms of number of sort of new bike lanes. I think it could be it tells us something, but I'm not sure. It has the potential if we're building out, for example, a new neighborhood, and put some bike lanes in when those new streets are going in. We could, and if we happen to have a lot of growth of new streets, it might look like, oh, we got a bunch of new lane miles of bike lanes, even if we're not really making any improvements in the existing network. So that might be one area where it wouldn't maybe tell us what we're hoping it tells us. I wonder if you've looked at or thought about like percent of lane miles that are low stress or by level of stress might be one interesting way to look at it, where we set some targets to reduce either the percent or even the total number of lane miles of high stress facilities for bike. That might be one way to really help narrow in on, I think, what we want to be focused on, which is trying to get essentially all the streets to a place where people can use them. So that would be one thing to just think about. Yeah, kind of looking at the opposite direction. What's our number of lane miles and or percent that aren't where we would like them to be? And then kind of related to that, and I mentioned to you earlier in another conversation, I think that might also help us get towards identifying kind of the top 10 bike gaps in the network, which I think from a performance standpoint would probably have the biggest impact on the usability of our network. So maybe just something I'm kind of looking at it from another angle. And then also, I know it's really challenging to set performance targets around mode share and some of the challenges with reporting and getting good data on that. But that was something that was discussed back when the Madison Motion Plan was underway, and we ultimately didn't include anything specific as a target in there, but I still think it's something that I know you've mentioned it in different conversations, and I would be very supportive of also thinking about setting an actual mode share target for us for biking, since I think that is ultimately an outcome that we're, pretty much all of our plans are pointing us in that direction.
Today, it's interesting. I gave a presentation to the bid board or not the bid board, the TID board for TID 46. And I think an example of what you're saying is if we look at the southwest quadrant of our city, between Mineral Point Road, Whitney Way, Gammon Road, and Odana Road. And all of those are high stress bikeways, and so we basically, our whole southwest quadrant on this side of the Beltline is high stress if you were trying to get anywhere by bike. And I actually feel like we're doing better. Like we have a plan for an all ages and abilities path for 2.5 miles on Mineral Point Road. Whitney Way will be close to all ages and abilities. At least it will be buffered bike lanes. Odana Road will have bike facilities. Now, Gammon Road, we still have a gap there, but it would be nice to look at areas of low mobility strategically and say, how do we make this jump? And so I agree with you in that.
And just I'll just add on. I think it's how we think about like our pedestrian network and sidewalks, right? We don't necessarily say like how many lane miles of sidewalks do we have, but rather what are our gaps, right? Where are we missing sidewalks? And that's kind of a good place to hone in on it. And I think our bike network, as good as it is compared to a lot of cities, still has a lot more gaps than our pedestrian network, for example. So I think starting to use that kind of a framing would move us in that right direction. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alder Foster. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. I had similar thoughts to Alder Foster, but I'll just put a slightly different spin on it, which is like, I would also like to see outcome measures like we're talking about. Like, are we filling gaps? Are we improving access by biking, using the concepts of LTS and gaps and things? But maybe that's more useful in terms of thinking about prioritizing investments. And the only difference I think that I would throw in there is that I would still like to see like how many miles are we doing per year as like an output measure, so that we know, like, are we doing the work? Like, are these projects still part of the workflow at the level that we expect to see? So.
All right, so that's both good. I think you both are expressing where's the need, but then also having a metric. Now, all of this kind of requires some, staff analysis and capability. I will have a replacement for Dave Trowbridge in a month or so, and so that will be helpful, where we can start to maybe be more proactive in some of these things.
All right, thank you, Chris. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Yeah, just on what Chris said, I agree. I think it still can be helpful to report out on kind of what we are doing, and maybe just as part of that work, really highlighting sort of what that is. So not just lumping it all together, like number of miles of bike lanes or routes or whatever. And I know on your list you do have them like facility type, but I think one way that I tend to think about it more than like facility type is it went from this to this, right? So if it's like adding a bike lane on a local street takes it from it's already basically low stress and it's still low stress. So while it might be easy to do to paint the stripes down there, we could count it as lane miles, but doing for us. So maybe putting a focus on, we take this many miles from medium stress or high stress and moved up to low stress. Maybe that would be a good way just to frame that sort of metric as Chris was just,
Thank you, Alder Foster. Are there any additional questions or discussion? All right, seeing none, thank you, Tom. Our final item for the evening then is Legistar 65871, Wisconsin DOT Beltline PEL background and opportunities. And just real brief, the PEL is planning and environment linkages. And I think Alder Furman is also on this policy advisory committee with myself. We met about a week and a half ago, I think, was the first time on a Thursday, and we'll be meeting again, I think, in July. But that the DOT is soliciting feedback from that group, and then I guess I would solicit feedback from you, and we'll be hearing a bit about it now from Tom. So please be thinking about feedback. I'd like to get something to them before their June 23rd deadline for feedback. So without further ado, go ahead, Tom.
Okay, and then I'm also going to mention that Margaret Bergamini has been involved in the project. Right now she's not an older person representing a district, but she has probably been involved with this project off and on for maybe 5 years. Is that correct, Margaret? Maybe. I don't know. It seemed like a lot of time, right?
Longer, I think. It's a long time, especially if you include the Verona Road sections. Then it's like my entire life.
Exactly. So I'm going to just mention that a little bit. The DOT and the Beltline. The DOT has really studied the Beltline on and off since 1994. And prior to my coming to the city, I often was a consultant working with the DOT on this project. The Verona Road interchange was an offshoot of one of the studies. In 2013, the DOT initiated a planning and environmental linkages study. It was put on pause basically from 2015 or 16 to 2020. They want to complete it by the end of 2021. It was nearing completion, but they just want to complete it, kind of close the door on that and then move to the next phase. The way PEL is it looks at broader solutions. It's kind of a pre-NEPA study. It kind of allows you to look at a broader range of alternatives. It's codified in 23 USC 168. If you look at the basic outline of it, it's goals and objectives, strategies, and evaluation, and a screening process. Now, that flows directly into NEPA, which is National Environmental Policy Act, and we normally think about those as like environmental impact statements or environmental assessments. And that's also codified. And if you look at the structure of a NEPA document, it's very similar, purpose and need alternatives, environmental consequences, which is just an evaluation, and then the preferred alternative. It's likely that the DOT is not going to have one big environmental impact statement for the Beltline, but they're probably going to say, all right, we did this big study, and they'll just target smaller portions of the Beltline for the light. So the study limits, go from 14 all the way to Highway and Cottage Grove. Some of the earlier studies looked at broad solutions like the North Mendota Parkway, the South Reliever. What if we did transit only, Beltline? They did a fair amount of demand modeling. So demand modeling is where you use a computer model that the MPO is really the steward of and say, all right, let's say we put it in North Mendota Parkway. Does it solve this problem or not? Most of the non-Beltline strategies were dismissed associated with that. They then moved into kind of the strategy packages right towards 2015 and 16, where they, rather than looking solely at a motor vehicle solution, they looked at other components. Now, this is, I think it would be incorrect to say, well, this is not a Beltline study, because it really is a Beltline study. I think it is a step forward, though, in that it just does not include solely the Beltline, but it also includes other components that are not solely motor vehicle driven. So I'm going to say that's perhaps more progressed, or DOT typically doesn't look at other modes as much in other projects as they have perhaps in this project. And I think the intention is for them to come up with a package of motor vehicle improvements, as well as other types of improvements that address it in a more comprehensive way. I suspect it still will be motor vehicle focused, but I think that the intent is not to have it solely motor vehicle focused. When I look through the project materials, they really have not changed at all since the study was put on pause in 2015. So I would not necessarily read too much into the materials that they presented at this thing as being what they want to move forward, because talking with their staff, they haven't done it. However, now that, Madison holders are in this committee, this is an opportunity for us to make sure some of the things that would really benefit the residents of Madison are fully considered. One thing that has changed is that they are proposing to do a flex lane, or it's a dynamic part-time shoulder use, which essentially opens up the shoulder during the rush hour. In fact, if you go on the Beltline right now, all the construction you see that's associated with this flex lane use. And by, if you were to, so basically it adds a lane of capacity when the Beltline most needs that capacity without really widening the footprint. Okay. So if you combine, you know, the implementation of the flex lane and then perhaps decreases in DFT associated with COVID, and probably a lot of the Beltline's capacity issues are addressed. Maybe not fully, but a lot of them are addressed. And so that provides the opportunity for the DOT to focus perhaps a little bit less on the mainline capacity and perhaps a little bit more on crossings, right? Because the Beltline is a historic investment that was built in the 1950s, early 60s, that has separated, you know, Madison and our growth areas. So one thing that they are considering and they've analyzed is the crossings and the connections, and they have modeled these crossings and connections in the demand model. And the demand model assigns, you know, if you put a crossing here, let's say you put a bridge at a certain location, let's say 3, that demand model will estimate how many people would use that crossing, okay? And how much traffic would be taken off of Whitney Way or Gammon Road. Okay? And they actually analyzed a fair number of these crossings. And right now I have crossing 3 and crossing 6 circled. And maybe because I have insider knowledge, but I know that crossing 3, which is basically just west of Whitney Way, provides really high utility for the city of Madison. The reason why is, one, you know, many people would use it. If I remember correctly, you know, between 9,000 and 12,000 people would use it on a day. But it also provides high value because right now, Metro Transit services, you know, kind of the whole southwest portion of Madison, like by Raymond Road and like, and they all go through that Whitney Way interchange. And that Whitney Way interchange is quite congested. So you think about, you know, the Whitney Way interchange is our way to connect, you know, Southwest Madison to our transit system. And so if there was another crossing, you know, just west of Whitney Way, that would provide high value for us in our transit system. It would provide high value for residents that use a car because it generates a fair amount of volume. And I believe it also provides benefits to the DOT because it relieves the Whitney Way and the Gammon Road interchange areas of cars that don't want to necessarily use the interchange. They just want to get through they want to get to the other side. You see what I'm saying? And so there may be an opportunity where there's kind of a win-win-win arrangement between the city and transit and perhaps even the DOT. One other area that may have high value, and you know, these are just things for, you know, U.S. policymakers to consider, would be 6, which is really kind of the extension of Greenway Cross and Stewart Avenue. And so if you think about, you know, the neighborhood, the Rimrock neighborhood, that's pretty isolated because we have Highway 14. Highway 14 is a barrier, you know, that isolates the Rimrock area that has homes, with the Greenway Cross, which has a lot of, you know, living wage paying jobs, right? And so the only real way to get between those two areas is you have to get up, you know, on, you know, Highway 14, go across and then come down. So you actually have to, you know, go through the Park Street interchange, cut across on Badger Road, or maybe, you know, on the Beltline, come down, come in on Greenway Cross. And so a crossing at 6, you know, would provide high value both for cyclists, transit users, but also probably just residents, because it, you know, Highway 14 is a historic investment, freeway investment, but it has separated a portion of our community. if that was bridged, there would be, I think there would be value in that. So they'll present you some of this information that when you go to these meetings and you think about this, these are things that may be of interest to you. Like, I think Alder Harrington is on this, and Tom, you're on this, and then Alder Furman. One other area of opportunity is that they are looking at pedestrian bicycle components, and they've looked at, I think, the geometric feasibility of these 10 different areas. Now, different connections have different levels of feasibility, and I'll give one example is if you look at the connection 6, right? Connection 6 would connect Fish Hatchery, with the Cannonball Trail, which would then connect with, the crossing that occurs just east of Verona Road, which could connect maybe to the path that's on the north side of the Beltline, just south of Odana Road. You could start to piece together a lot of parallel routes along the Beltline. The hard thing, like with Alternative 6, right, is that it goes through the Arboretum, and that's a national historic landmark. So that's a big deal. So some of these crossings are really feasible, and yes, it'd be great if the DOT could help us with them. Some of them may be a little bit harder, like if you're going through a national historic landmark, but it doesn't mean that they can't really be explored. If you look at 3, the crossing at 3 and crossing 9, those are the same crossings that we just discussed, between Whitney Way, crossings for Whitney Way. So things that have a value for motor vehicles and residents travel, reconnecting our city, also have the same value with bicycle connections. And when we think about areas of opportunity, most of the interchanges represent a pretty significant constraint to bicycles and pedestrians. Right here, as I just very quickly laid out, from what I can remember, the grade separated crossings of the Beltline that are for bicycles and pedestrians that are dedicated to bicycles and pedestrians, right? And so we have one just east of Gammon Road, National Road. We have one, the Southwest Bike Trail west of Verona Road. We have the Cannonball east of Verona Road. We have one that kind of is just west of Seminole. There's that grade separated underpass of Verona Road. We have the underpass that leads to the Capital City Trail. And so those are good. But if we can get more, of those, or if we can just make the interchange crossings easier. So an example would be, most of the interchanges, such as Gammon Road or Whitney Way, if you're on a bike, they're very difficult to get through, and they're not very comfortable, right? So I doubt, or I think it would be difficult to get the crossings through the interchanges to be all ages and abilities, just because there's so much going on, islands and lights and all that. But they could certainly be improved, and they could be improved to a greater extent. And so, as the DOT is implementing this, the flex lane and the like on the Beltline, their attention may focus towards crossings. And so, crossings help the city. The crossings can help the city, both new crossings, such as a grade separation west of Whitney Way or Stewart Greenway Cross, but also if we can make the existing crossings better so that you don't feel so exposed as a pedestrian or a cyclist. So they won't solve any of these problems with the Pell, but if they are, if they understand that these are things of great concern to the city, they may incorporate these when they start to evaluate alternatives in their environmental plan. So thinking that's just kind of some of the thoughts that I thought, because I was involved with this process previously, I felt like right now I do not think that the DOT has a preconceived agenda because it's been on pause for 4 years, but I do feel like now is a good time for city members to influence their thinking and their direction with future environmental documents.
Thank you, Tom. All right, questions? Margaret, go ahead.
Tom, thank you for this presentation. It was extremely helpful and informative. And I agree with you. We have some opportunities here. I have a question. Since you started me down memory lane and then started showing these maps, do we have, when we were redoing Verona Road, we had a great deal of discussion about pedestrian and bike accessibility in that underpass, how comfortable it would be, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering if the city or anybody else has any hard data on how many people, or could we develop data on how many bikes and peds are, say, using that crossing on Verona south of the Beltline?
Yeah. I don't know. I've actually been through that quite a bit on my bike.
Okay.
Would it feel like the deep, dark tunnel that everyone was worried about? I feel like it's more open than I thought it would be. That was actually installed not necessarily solely because of its use potential, but a lot of that had to do with environmental justice and making sure that we had. So that particular infrastructure improvement, I would say environmental justice was perhaps the driving factor for that one. I could ask and see if we can get some data on that.
Well, the reason I ask is because, as you said, you experience it as a bicyclist. You've experienced it differently than perhaps we envisioned it would be as we were in the process of design. So I'm just wondering about, one thing I recall being said while we were doing that was, oh, well, this is kind of going to be temporary because the Beltline is going to be reconstructed, blah, blah, blah. It was right. And as an environmental justice matter, it's the problematic other connections to the neighborhoods. We still managed to erect significant barriers for some of those neighborhoods. But I would just be curious to evaluate the effectiveness of what we ended up coming up with. And I can think of you could do that with counts, but we could also do it by looking at the uses around those intersections. What businesses have survived, what have not, what kind of access do residents have to the basic necessities of life. So that, because I think, the crossings, for Madison and for our neighborhoods, it is a significant opportunity. It's also a significant opportunity to fail, quite frankly. So I appreciate it. And as much data as we could get or information we could get, qualitative or quantitative, I think that would be helpful. And I really, really like the idea of evaluating a crossing on Highway 14. That's been access to that industrial park just south of the Beltline between Fish Hatchery and Highway 14. It's a critical employment zone that we've never appreciated sufficiently. And I think that crossing, I had never seen that proposed, and we should look at it. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Margaret. Alder Foster, go ahead.
Thank you, and thanks for bringing this and for your presentation, Tom. I'm glad that we're talking about it at this stage. I mean, I'm really interested. So I'm very supportive, I think, of basically what you shared and kind of the big picture concepts of really prioritizing and advocating from a Madison-based transportation perspective. I think primarily these additional connections for all modes that you called out, potential additional connections for ped bike accessibility, and then the ped bike access along the routes where that's missing today, where you can get along at the car if you get up onto the Beltline, but there's no good parallel route in the corridor. I don't know. I know the DOT is looking for sort of initial round for public feedback in a couple of weeks, and so this is sort of our opportunity to do that. I imagine that won't be the end. That we could probably work on something, and then maybe even look at a draft of a statement or something at our next meeting and vote on it and still get it to them. I would expect that would still be meaningful for them. So I wonder if that's something maybe Tom you could work on, is sort of a draft of basically some of the points that you had in your presentation for us to react to, and then actually vote on at a future meeting that kind of captures that these are the priority, kind of priorities related to the project.
Now, we could do that. We can also, they've offered to present to us, and so we could actually, they would be willing. And so,
I mean, that sounds even better. Honestly, we could just, that way they can hear the different feedback from members of the body. So yeah, that sounds great to me. I guess one thing that would be helpful, maybe as part of that presentation or advance of it, would be, it looks like you've kind of done some pretty good analysis around which of those additional crossings, you would recommend prioritizing for sort of the all mode question and bus access. I wonder if it'd be possible to do something similar for some of those ped bike crossings or alignments, and really just focusing on what would give us the biggest improvement to our transportation system, so that we can share that even more specifically with them.
Yeah, I think so what I did, I kind of gave you some information from behind the curtain. But when I left Strand, I did not bring any electronic files, and so I didn't. And so these are actually, the DOT has this information, and so like members of the board or the policy advisory board or committee, whatever it is, you can request this information, and they have it, and so you can do it. So my circles are circles of having seen that modeling before, but I no longer have copies of that modeling. But the DOT can provide that information, and so I would encourage you to ask for that information.
Yeah, so maybe that's an approach that those that are on that body could ask for some of that info. I think it would be great for obviously their analysis and your analysis when you were working on that project was really about functionality of the highway and sort of that regional transportation component. I think if we could do a sort of Madison focused, really looking at current and expected land use, obviously we got the West Town Mall plan that's in process right now. So we've got a different sense of what we're expecting there than we did when this study was underway a couple of years ago. So I think really looking at that, what we know about how the land is used today and how we think it's going to be in 5, 10, 20 years, and really put out some markers from our perspective, really separate from the challenges and how likely or not. Just, I think we should be really clear about, you know what, a connection here is valuable for our community, whether that's a all mode connection or a ped bike one. So I think the more we could do that and sort of feed that into the process would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Foster. Alder Furman.
Thank you, Chair. I would actually probably caution the idea of having them come here and give the same presentation they just gave to us a few weeks ago. I think what Tom provided was incredibly helpful. Everybody does have access to we can make I'll make sure that the presentation that was given a few weeks ago was provided to everybody. So if we were to invite DOT to come here, I'd like it to be much more focused on providing them feedback and having a discussion opposed to getting that presentation again. I just think that would be not a great use of the board's time, but I do think it would be a very good use of the board's time to have more of an interactive discussion with them. And I'm actually still a fan, regardless of whether they come here or not, of having this board come out with some sort of statement and having Tom help us put something together so that way it's pretty clear the things that this policy planning board wants them to be considering. So that would be my 2 cents based on next steps. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder Furman. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks, and I appreciate that recommendation too. I think just in terms of getting the gears turning, I think if we are going to take that route of sort of deciding what our recommendations would be, I'd like to throw an idea out there that I don't know if the board would get behind, but just thinking sort of even longer term. I think when the part-time shoulder decision was made, it was seen as kind of a win in terms of using existing space to solve a short-term traffic problem. I don't think a majority of this board felt that way. But what I'm thinking is this question about fixing the traffic is going to come up again 5 or 10 years from now. And so to sort of get ahead of that, I think it would be worthwhile to pose the question of how are we going to operate these facilities without ever expanding capacity? And, what does that look like? Is it using lanes for high capacity vehicles, or I guess that's what we want to call them, toll lanes, that sort of thing, and get folks thinking about what is this thing going to look like 10, 20 years from now without becoming bigger. Because I think that's where, I don't want to speak for other folks on the board, but it seems to be where our conversation was last time.
I'm going to augment what you said in the previous statement. As far as the board coming out with a specific recommendation or action, to the DOT, the board could do that right now, but they are intending on having 4 meetings, and I suspect they are going to present information that would be useful in developing those recommendations. So maybe I'll ask them, perhaps like they have done modeling, but they haven't showed you the results of that modeling. Are they planning on doing that? That would be useful information as the board. And, right around meeting 3, perhaps there's an actual formal action, meeting 4. So I'll get more information on when the appropriate time for that resolution would be. However, those who are on the board now, continue your advocacy for these are the things we're interested in. Chris, I think your statement is a very interesting statement, saying how can this facility be managed so the capacity expansion is not needed for the next 30 years? And so that's a very interesting question. And that also could be posed to WSDOT, because if they were to, reconstructing the Beltline is a $500 million investment, and is that a wise use of public funds? And then does that create the VMT and the land use effects that we want? And so what you just mentioned, Chris, was, I think, a very applicable and question.
All right, thank you. Are there any further comments, questions, or discussion on this item? Alder Foster.
Maybe just trying to synthesize kind of what I've heard here, a few things. Maybe Tom could do a little bit more work around kind of that question of trying to further kind of prioritize which of these different things we talked about tonight would be most beneficial for Madison kind of transportation purposes. Two, maybe starting to put together here kind of, whether it's a draft statement already or even just kind of the components of here are the sorts of things that the board could weigh in on in terms of relative priorities, kind of working on that. And then I do think, inviting DOT, and I agree with Alder Furman. We very explicitly should say, no, don't come and give your same presentation here. We can all watch that, but inviting them to have a dialogue and a conversation earlier, I think would be really worthwhile. So those, I think and I also really appreciated what Chris said about this bigger and important question that we should be thinking of posing to them. So I support all of those things. And I think this is something we should plan on having, if not at our next meeting, certainly within kind of 2 meetings, and really keep this in front of us, because I think, I'm sure that those that are representing us on that board are going to be bringing this info back, but I think it'd be great for them to hear from us directly as the policy board as well.
Thank you, Alder Foster. I did just send a copy of the presentation that the DOT gave us on the 3rd of June to Riva for distribution, so hopefully we'll be getting that shortly. All right, any further comments or discussion? All right, seeing none, that's all we have for the evening. I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Thank you, Alder Furman. Is there a second? Second by Badri. All those in favor of adjourning tonight's meeting, please unmute yourselves and say aye.
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 Opposed, no. It sounds like we're adjourned. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Bye.